the last time we were talking about the Fangraphs top 50 free agents, and a guy that was, I think, what was Steven Matz, 31 on your list, I believe, something like that?
Yeah, just outside of the top 30.
Yeah, and we haven't talked, so I wanted to get your thoughts on the signing, how much you think he will help the Cardinals.
Yeah, I think last time I was on, we talked about Marcus Stroman as the place both of our minds went initially. And this is like if you go to the store and you're going to get like a nice, I don't know, let's say a soda. And they don't have your soda, so you get the store brand version. That's Steven Matz. I mean, he's not as good as Marcus Stroman.
That's really good.
He does a lot of the same stuff. He gets grounders. You know, he's not going to kill you with walks. He keeps the ball on the ground mostly. He doesn't strike out a ton. I see what the Cardinals are doing in signing him. He's the kind of pitcher that makes sense for them. I'm kind of sad they didn't get Stroman, and I hope they're still in that market.
One of the things about being whether you're talking about being a Cardinals fan or you're just someone who in a media job, you know, analyzes them and observes them on a daily basis. I mean, I always try to talk myself into believing or wanting to believe that they could still be pursuing a Stroman. And it seems like I get burned. The only time I was highly skeptical, ironically, and said, well, look, that's never going to happen, was the constant, years-long infatuation with Nolan Arenado. And I would be, Mr. Genius here. Yeah. Well, that's not going to happen, But I try to talk myself into other things that, in fact, don't happen. And I sort of get not burned, but fooled every time. So I don't know. What's the realistic possibility that they could be digging away a little bit behind the scenes on Stroman?
I don't think it's very likely. It just doesn't jive with the way that they usually allocate resources. You're basically benching one of Hudson or Miklasz if you do that. And look, I think I would do that still. I think it's useful to have 6 good pitchers, and a lot of those guys are going to spend time in the IL, and I wouldn't hate having a 6-man rotation anyway at points next year. But I don't think they're going to do it. That's just not really the way that the Mozeliak front office has acted. So I'm with you. I'll believe it when I see it. I'd like to believe that it's still going to happen, but kind of seems like they decided they didn't really want to go to the top of the market. And the pitching market is not as frothy as the position player market, but there have been a lot of big money contracts. My estimates and the crowdsource estimates have both been low kind of across the board. So the Cardinals, they didn't overpay, I don't think. I think the deal for Matz is pretty reasonable. And from that sense, fine, but I just wish they had gone a little bigger if this is the only move they're going to make.
Well, that leads to the next question. I plan on hope to write something on this maybe tomorrow and talk about it on the show. To me, it's maybe a little unsettling that they signed Matz, and I like the signing, like you. We all know, right? Like you said, he's not he's in that elite class, but he'll help them, and it's a good fit and all that. But it kind of bothers me right now that if indeed this is it in terms of starting pitching, it's like, well, we got our guy. Everyone have a nice rest of the winter. And I'm like, well, wait a minute now. It's kind of like you're kind of in the same spot you were last winter when. Wainwright will be 41. Jack Flaherty, who I think is going to be fine, but you never know. Injury-torn season. Matz has been healthy in his last 3 full seasons. But there is injury histories there. Miklasz, we know about the injury history there. Hudson's coming off Tommy John. I like Jake Woodford, and I think really one of the things that got Mike Schilt in hot water with management is because they really wanted to see Woodford utilized as a starter, and Schilt held out until he had no other choice. So, yeah. But I'm wondering what happens if they would get, sidelined or derailed by a couple more starting pitcher injuries next season. I don't see a lot of depth there. Am I wrong?
I like Zach Thompson, but yeah, it's kind of thin. And this was a little bit the problem with the Cardinals this year was that I think they just in their head said, well, we have these 4 interesting prospects and, probably 3 to 4 of them will work out. Well, that's optimistic, and sometimes it doesn't happen, and then you're left a little shorthanded. It just feels weird to me that, they watched the same team that we watched all year, and they said, you know what, we're short from, winning the Central, and we have money coming off the books and everything this year. Is Steven Matz. That's just not how I looked at this team.
Right.
And I think we've talked about this off and on. They have a difficult puzzle to fit just because they have a lot of spots that I wouldn't really want to move away from in the lineup. There's not a lot of obvious places to upgrade if you're not going to be basically looking for a superstar. But they're still pretty good at, having 3 reasonable outfielders, to where a 4th outfielder is not a big pickup. And so pitching was the obvious place to improve. And I do find it strange that the pitcher that they honed in on, and it felt to me like getting one big guy at the top of the market was the way to go, was Matz, who is he's a cut below the other guys who are available. And while I like the fit a lot more as a second guy. I don't know. It's disappointing as a Cardinals fan, but
right.
They didn't. It's not an embarrassing signing. This isn't paying double what he's worth for a guy who doesn't fit the system at all in a panic. I think if you're just looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective, they're going to do fine. It's a pretty good deal relative to the other pitching deals. I fault the strategy a little bit.
Ben Clemens is with us from Fangraphs, and I always enjoy talking to him, and I know many of you really enjoy it when Ben visits with us here on the Bernie Miklasz Show. Well, I want to ask you this, and we'll get off the Cardinals here in a couple of minutes anyway. Opinions aside on what you think that they should do, what's your read on what you think they will do? What are your expectations from this point on?
So one thing that I wouldn't completely shock me is if they end up active in the trade market after the lockout ends. And I don't really know when that's going to be, but some teams are going to come up short on shortstops. It's just hard for it not to be that way, given the way that everything has broken out, and given that the Rangers, got 2 shortstops essentially. So someone's going to be a little bit short of shortstops. And if you don't really want to shop at the Andrelton Simmons, Jose Iglesias tier, then I think the Cardinals might have some interest in one of DeYoung or Sosa, presumably DeYoung, based on how the team's been talking about both. But I like both players just fine, and I could imagine them trading one of them for, some close to the majors prospect or something along those lines. Aside from that, it's hard for me to imagine where an obvious place to improve is. If you don't want to get a really good pitcher, then you should get a guy who is basically John Lester or Jay Happ, who can eat some innings, and you're not really hoping to put in the rotation, but you can if you need to. Those are useful players, and this year was a great example. The Cardinals needed both of those guys. I think getting one of them before the season for a not exorbitant cost, rather than trading during the season to do it, would be pretty wise. But I feel like we say this a lot. The Cardinals just aren't going to be super active in free agency this offseason. And I don't see a need to go out and make some kind of big Arenado-esque trade. So I kind of think they're just going to be here. There's not a lot of top-tier pitching available in the trade market, so I don't think they're getting better that way. I think they're mostly going to go into next season with the team they have.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I hope they reinforce the bullpen, and I think they will. And we can all talk about names.
That's something I kind of glossed over. They could get 1 or 2 of the relievers that are still around and make the bullpen look a little bit better.
No doubt about it. And when we look at the Cardinals' offense, I think, first of all, they're going to be counting on having, a lot more days and nights of their 3 outfielders playing in the same outfield at the same time. I think, according to I wrote about this so many times and talked about it so many times. I believe that outfield was intact. O'Neill, Bader, Carlson. I think all 3 of them in the same outfield, same game. I think it was only 86 times last year. And so if you look at it that way, it's not like it's crazy to expect improvement within. Carlson will be better in year 2. But other than that, I'm sure unless they're going to go with to use a horse racing term, they're going to go with a Nolan Gorman, Juan Yepez, rookie DH platoon exacta ticket. Yeah. I don't know where I'm hard pressed to think about where the big improvement will come from.
Yeah, I actually think that's a pretty good option. I think Yepez has definitely been underrated by prospect hawks, as it were. The guy just hits for a lot of power, and if that's who you have as kind of the weak half of your platoon against lefties and a backup first baseman, that's a really nice piece to have.
Yep,
I agree. I like Nootbaar as well. I'm more skeptical on his long-term development, but come on, he can hit at a major league average level just fine. If you're not spending big, I don't think you're likely to do a lot better than that in free agency. And I mean, maybe the ticket then is a fourth outfielder who can rotate into that DH spot some and spell guys some in the outfield. Because, like you said, they're hoping for a lot more games with all three of their chosen outfielders playing. But all those guys are prone to little nicks and dings, and they should be giving them regular rest anyway. That's just the smart way to operate teams these days.
Right.
So a guy who can rotate in there a little bit, and I mean, Newbar can a little, but he's not fully qualified to be your like decent defensive outfielder fourth guy. So that wouldn't bother me too much. I don't know. Like, I like the offense. I like where the offense is at a lot. I just think it's very hard to improve without getting a really top end guy. They're just not going to. So I think it'll be probably the best offense in the Central next year.
It's looking that way. You take Garcia and Escobar. Who was it? Eduardo Escobar. Yeah. You take them out of there. I mean, those guys hit like 25% of their home runs in the final 2 months of the season. And
the Brewers have kind of just been doing a lot of nothing. I mean, I was speculating that they might end up as Michael Conforto's landing spot if he doesn't get a big deal, just as a kind of rebound place. They've done a lot of those rebound deals, Yasmani Grandal and Avi Garcia, but they better hope that happens because they just have no offense.
Ben Clemens with us for a few more minutes, and Ben, getting back to something you said near the top of the interview when we were talking about Fangraphs' excellent piece, which I refer to over and over again, the top 50 free agents. And that was before all this started, of course. And you were saying how, in many cases, the projections for contracts, not only your own and some of your colleagues, but the crowdsourcing have really exceeded what the projections were for the most part. And why do you think that is? I mean, I'm never shocked when there's a feeding frenzy, but and especially when the deadline for the CBA seemed to push it, obviously. But why do you think that is, that there has been so much aggressiveness?
That is a wonderful question. And I think what it comes down to is that I just underestimated on the player side, the importance of a deadline. And on the team side, the importance of a bunch of players looking to deal and some uncertainty as to when you'll be able to complete business otherwise. If you don't get a signing done by the lockout, and let's say that it ends somewhat congenially for both sides, no one's getting taken to the cleaners, it doesn't impact any of the games next year, and the economic picture isn't changed that much, that could still be mid-January. These things don't move quickly when there's no obvious deadline. Both sides are trying to basically be obstinate and make the other side break, and so no one has a lot of incentive to move quickly. And so then you get to it's the beginning of February and we need to sign a shortstop and a second baseman, and if we don't, then maybe an outfielder, and we probably need two pitchers and a reliever. And it's just it's March now and your team's not done and it's spring training. I think that I kind of underestimated, and the industry as a whole did. It's not like I was alone in thinking that deals would be slow and maybe all the deals signed before December would be kind of underpays. Teams and players both were just we'd rather be done ahead of this deadline so we don't have a month and a half or 2 months of uncertainty. As to the values that are going through, I think the Rangers have had a lot to do with this, to be honest. Basically, I think the market as a whole was reacting a lot to the prices that we saw for contracts last year. Contracts were hard to come by for players. Good deals were. And that was reasonable to think that might continue. But something that is kind of underrated about last year in retrospect is that very few teams tried to get better that weren't already good. There just weren't any teams that were right on that cuspy point where they needed to get a lot better. And a good example of a team that did that was the Cardinals by trading for Arenado. But there weren't a lot of examples of what the Tigers are doing this offseason or what the Rangers are doing this offseason. And it really is kind of a delicate balance. You add two buyers without subtracting any of the existing ones. And there's only so many players. And, the Dodgers lost a shortstop, so they're bidding, and the Yankees need a shortstop, so they're bidding. But now the Tigers are bidding for a shortstop. They didn't even lose one. They just didn't have a good one. And now the Rangers are buying two, and they weren't losing obvious free agents to contribute to the market. There's just more buyers than normal right now. And I think that's driving prices up pretty strongly.
And I'm always generally, not in all cases, of course, but very strongly pro player when it comes to those guys getting paid. But there's the other side to it, and it's not. You know me, I think, well enough by now. I got no patience for well, they're playing a child's game. They don't need this much money. No, but there are some contracts that make much better sense than others, and so in that context, even though we appreciate a team that won 60 games last year, just going out and spending a fortune on Seager and Simeon and John Gray and Cole Calhoun, do you think the money's well spent? I mean, is this going to suddenly make them a formidable team?
No. So yes and no. Do I think it's going to make them a formidable team? I do not. Do I think it's money well spent? I actually don't think it's that bad of an allocation of resources. And the reason for that is that it's not very easy to have the ability to add this many wins in one fell swoop, to add this much talent to your team in one fell swoop. And if you think about the way that teams are made today, teams have gotten really good at having cheap players. I mean, they're just impressive at figuring out when they can get guys in and pre-arb and having the service time be right to where they get an extra year of arbitration. And you're paying a lot of your stars just not that much money. That's how baseball kind of works. That what teams are hunting for is these early career, 0 to 5 years of service time players who deliver excess value. And if you look at both the Rangers and Tigers, they're just lousy with them. If they are an average team, they'll be an average team on low payroll. And so, are these overpays? Yeah, they are. They're paying more per win than we've seen, or per projected talent than we've seen in a while. But it doesn't, you don't get a trophy for having the most wins per dollar spent. And these teams have spare money, but not spare talent, and no other way to acquire talent. So I think in that sense, it makes good sense what they're doing. They won't probably, either of them, make the playoffs this year, but they both will improve pretty markedly and put it in a situation where if a few prospects break right, well, now it's pretty interesting. And if a few prospects broke right this year and they hadn't signed a bunch of free agents, then they'd go into next year and be like, well, all right, well, we'd like a generational shortstop. Who? Oh, no one. We'd like a really, really solid all-star second baseman. Who is there? No one. And the fact that all the shortstops are this year means if you want one, go get one. If it's a year early, it's a year early.
Ben Clemens, as always, thank you so much for the time. I'll repeat, always enjoy your visits and the conversation, and we'll bug you soon enough. Maybe if there's when the Cardinals make that shocking move for Marcus Stroman, you definitely have to come on and we can talk about that. So
I hope you are right.
Yeah, I know. It really is an ideal fit. Anyway, you have a good, until we talk again, happy writing to you, and we'll be reading you at Fangraphs.
Thanks a lot, Bernie. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care, my friend. That's our friend Ben Clemens here on the Bernie Show. And, I think I like the Matz signing better than Ben, not that he hates it. I was reading a couple, I read Keith Law's take on the signing. He was pretty positive. He's pointing out, some of the risk. I mean, although there's, unless it's Max Scherzer we're talking about, like the greatest pitcher of his generation. And, I really think he is. I know some people would say Kershaw, but I'd say Max Scherzer because of how strong he's going to the finish line. Had his best ERA of his career last season. And I think the Mets are going to really benefit from having him there, and I think he'll stay healthy. And even if he slips a bit, so what? But my point being that, I think Matz's injury history, I hope, knock on wood, although I'm not, I'm not superstitious that way, but he had a nightmare 2020 season, but there was a big crowd of players that you could apply the same thing to. I just think that was an outlier season and dismiss it. You know, his last 3 full seasons, he's been very healthy, and he's made at least 29 starts, and he's never been a huge innings muncher because just common sense. I mean, he's been really vulnerable going through a lineup the third time. But a guy like Ali Marmol is well aware of this, and he understands that the way you run a pitching staff has changed, and they will have people lined up. They will plan accordingly with the expectation that they'll get 5 innings, sometimes 6 out of Martz, and, you know, call it a day. I mean, you can't force something that's not there. But certainly, he brings a lot to the table. There are some risks and there are some limitations to what he can do in terms of how deep into games. He's got a slider that needs to be fixed or thrown away or something because it just doesn't work very well. But I think, that with the fit and also his age, and I think he's getting better. I mean, I think the Cardinals have a good chance to, benefit from this contract. But to Ben's point, I have to agree with it, and I know many of you do too. I mean, I'm not radical about this because the Cardinals do have their way of doing business, and despite claims to the contrary, their way of doing business has been very successful in terms of winning. But it's also frustrating because they're a good team that's close to being able to compete for a championship by just having better talent. Same reason Brian Kelly goes to LSU. He wants access to better talent. Win a championship because you get better. You got better athletes. You got more dudes. You're more capable. The Cardinals are one of those teams. I mean, they're good. They're like, I don't know why I'm going into this Notre Dame Cardinals riff, but the Cardinals are kind of like Notre Dame, right? They're going to be good. You can count on them. I mean, they're a good stock, man. You get a return for investing in the Cardinals. You can count when Brian Kelly was at Notre Dame. You could count on having a good football team, very good football team, just about every year. I mean, with one bad year in there. But just like Notre Dame was very good but could not get the athletes they needed to be great, the Cardinals are that version, that equivalent in Major League Baseball. They're very, very good and have been a long time, despite what whiners say. I mean, it's factually correct. They're very, very good. That's not an opinion. It's a fact. I mean, their record since 2000 in particular is ridiculously good. But, when you get into the postseason so many times, just like Notre Dame getting to the college football playoff so many times, right? You got to find a way to win it. And most of the time, not always, because baseball can be random in October. Another lesson people forget. Unexpected things happen. It's not a 162-game track. It's a short track. It's very volatile. But when you make the playoffs as often as the Cardinals do, and you don't go as deep as you should or you want, you're not taking advantage of the opportunities that you've put yourself in with a lot of good decisions. They're just so limited in terms of bold thinking, and I think it holds them back. It prevents a very good team from having the opportunity to be a great team. And if you're a great team, it doesn't mean you're going to win it all. But what it means is you're going to have the horses to win it all, and you're going to be in much better position to win it all. And I don't know why the Cardinals cannot get over that psychological hurdle. Now, I know what the answer would be on the Bertarelli Cutlery text line, 855-282-8255. It'll be, well, DeWitt's cheap. He isn't cheap, but he could be more aggressive. They got a top 10 payroll. That's like usually their spot, right around there. They'll be in the top 10 probably this year as well. He's not cheap. In fact, when they spend a lot of money, a lot of times it blows up in their faces. He's not cheap, but he's not aggressive enough. And the Cardinals are too content to settle for like the Steven Matzes of the pitching world and like sort of take a bow for signing him. And then you're like, well, is that all there is? You guys have a chance to be really, really good. I mean, why don't you push it this season? Why don't you get out of your comfort zone just a little bit? And I think that's a fair assessment of who they are.